It's mankind's greatest achievement. The rule of law, the idea that no matter who you are, your actions have consequences.
Better Call Saul does it all. The show is about things, many of them to be specific. Sibling rivalries, craving a validation that you'll never get, how difficult and frustrating it can be for us to truly change our ways and leave our bad habits in the past, along with the horrors of the drug trade, organized crime, and the day-to-day culture of the legal world. All as we watch Jimothy McGill in real time go from a good-faith, struggling lawyer working out the back of a nail salon to the criminal dirtbag Saul Goodman that we see in Breaking Bad, with an extravagant McMansion and a central role in one of the biggest international meth operations in history. But though Better Call Saul ends up going in every possible direction, the show's stories and characters are still rooted in and built upon from a single overarching question, a question that humanity has been asking for a long, long time. What exactly is the law? Better Call Saul puts forth a full-throttle, cynical takedown of the criminal justice system, from the police and prosecutors, to the judges, the juries, and defense attorneys. Our characters reside in a world of utter legal nihilism, one in which the most heinous of crimes often go wholly unpunished by the courts, a world of elitism, patronizing condescension oozing out of those at the top, and a world where good-meaning people who resist the allure of criminality receive nothing but mockery, humiliation, and suffering for their courage. And it's within this world that two fundamentally different models of what the law is battle it out. In the red corner, we have Team Rule of Law, those who see the law as what separates the humans from the other animals. Simply put, the rule of law refers to a set of standards that restrict the arbitrary use of power, force, and coercion. Rules that apply to absolutely everybody within a given society and that ensure justice at all costs. The legal world at Better Call Saul overwhelmingly believe in the rule of law. People like Jimmy's older brother, Chuck McGill, Howard Hamlin, Cliff Main, and Kim Wexler. Well, you know, for a while. What we see in all of these individuals, what unites them, is an overwhelming respect and admiration for the rules of the game. To these folks, the law is something to respect, the arbiter of a moral and prosperous society. But more so than that, they believe the law is competent, that legal institutions have the strength, the ability, and the willingness to accomplish their goals, to hold their rule breakers accountable, and to stay true to their values. And in the blue corner, we have Team Law as an illusion, those who see the law as a tool, something that can be obeyed and supported when convenient, but tossed aside when it stands in the way of your goals. Most of the criminal world of Better Call Saul obviously falls into this category. People like Michael, wrong Michael, Gus Fring, Lalo Salamanca, Jimmy McGill, and Kim Wexler, eventually. To these individuals, the law is a performance, a show meant to persuade an audience. That audience can vary, you know, a judge, a defense lawyer, a state prosecutor, another prosecutor, a cop. But so long as the most convincing and persuasive of performances can be made, the law can be manipulated into doing your bidding, even when that means allowing for the most grave injustices to go unaccounted for. And while Better Call Saul gives ample time to both sides of this war to make their case as to what the law is, it also makes it clear that while neither side entirely wins, one side makes a complete fool out the other. So let's take a dive into the stories of Better Cali Ali to explain why exactly the rule of law is nothing more than an illusion, why it simply doesn't exist. It goes without saying that the law places a great degree of trust in those who are asked to uphold and defend it. You can be a detective, a prosecutor, a defense attorney, it doesn't matter. You're in a position of power, and there are responsibilities that come with that power. But this trust is a double-edged sword, as the ability of the law to enforce its rules for the common criminal, a drug dealer or a bank robber, is infinitely stronger than its ability to enforce those rules for its own. According to the CBC, the Canadian Broadcasting Corporation, between 2010 and 2015, Canadian law societies disciplined more than 200 Canadian lawyers for stealing over $157 million worth of their clients' money. These lawyers were as shameless can be, taking money from clients' trust funds, billing them for services not provided, even helping themselves to deceased clients' estates. And yet less than 10% of these lawyers faced the criminal prosecution they deserved, despite the fact that their crimes were acknowledged by the law societies that disciplined them. What this tells us is when the enforcers of the law's rule weaponize and manipulate the trust placed in them, the same standards of accountability applied to the shoplifter or the drug user are thrown out the window. And nobody is a more compelling example of this naivete than Kim Wexler. The story of Kim is that of a truly criminal lawyer, evil to the core, and a legal order that is consistently one step behind her. In the year 2002, Kim is a straight arrow if there ever was one. She follows the rules and respects them to the core. She becomes shocked and angry when she hears Jimmy broke the law to help out a pie enthusiast. When Jimmy tells her that Nacho, a new client of his, is a bad man, she urges him to
tell the police.
In a flashback to when she was still a law student working in the HHM mailroom, she shows a great deal of deference and respect to Chuck and for HHM. In a way, Kim is a lot like Walter White, in the sense that she was once relatively quiet, reserved, and eager to follow in the footsteps of others and do things by the book. And you know, while the story of a young, wide-eyed lawyer turning into a cynical centrist is so cliche, that's not the path Kim goes down. She doesn't grow cynical or jaded. She maintains her ambition, her passion for the law, and her strong work ethic. What she does lose is her faith in the ability of legal institutions to get things done. Now, this isn't necessarily a bad thing. After all, a lack of faith in the institutions around you can be a strong motivating factor for an individual to blaze their own path, to develop a strong sense of confidence in their own decision-making. Well, if you don't trust the environments around you to do what needs to be done, what other choice do you have other than to at least try to take matters into your own hands? The problem for Kim is that her lack of faith leads her down two very, very, very different paths. As Kim becomes disillusioned by her work, she abandons her cushy job at Schweikart and Coakley to become a public defender, getting paid pennies on the dollar to represent people who can't afford to hire their own lawyer. This was a risky decision, one that most lawyers never make, but I'd argue it showed us the potential that Kim's faith in herself could have brought to the world. She makes it work, providing the kind of legal representation to everyday people that typically stays reserved only for those who can shell out the big bucks for top-tier counsel. Cliff Main, whose son is Tuca by the way, is so impressed by her work that he offers Kim the opportunity of a lifetime to meet with the Jackson Mercer Foundation and the Lieutenant Governor of Arizona with the hopes of implementing a justice reform program in the state. Kim becomes the sole reason why hundreds of potentially innocent people don't go to prison, and her meet with Jackson Mercer would help democratize access to good legal representation within a system that is designed to maintain such counsel strictly for the wealthy. If only it were that simple, right?
One of the smartest and most promising human beings I've ever known. And this is the life you choose.
As time goes by, Kim also becomes increasingly ruthless, manipulative, and willing to distort the law in the pursuit of her own ambition. She convinces a random woman to risk her job for her by pulling at her heartstrings. She weaves together an intricate plot, complete with a fake website, hundreds of fake letters, fake voices, a fake phone line, all to fool a district attorney into not prosecuting someone who was clearly guilty of assault. And in one of her most repulsive schemes, she plays double agent, scheming with Jimmy to help out his client, some bitter old guy because he told her she was fake, all while lying to her coworkers and her paralegals' faces for weeks on end about her intentions, putting them through mountains of red tape and paperwork and discovery in the hopes of tiring them out. And when Rich Schweikart, her boss, sees through the illusion, giving her a chance to walk away from the situation without, being fired, she instead gaslights him, playing dumb and screaming at him in front of the entire firm.
Please tell me why I would risk everything for some squatter.
From the Albuquerque district attorney to Cliff Mann, from Rich Schweikart to her paralegals, every legal actor she knows continues time and time again to fall for her deception. Kim Wexler, the big bad banking lawyer, the compassionate and strong public defender? Come on now. Beyond the finger wagging that lawyers so often get for breaking laws that would put anybody else behind bars, rogue judges also constantly slip through the cracks like it's nothing. In the past 12 years alone within the U.S., out of all the state and local judges who've had predatory, illegal, or immoral behavior recognized by a legal system, 9 out of every 10 keep their jobs. 9 out of every 10. Among these judges is one demon of a man, Judge Les Hayes, who put hundreds of people too poor to pay legal fines in jail, including 496 days for a single mom who had unpaid traffic tickets and whose kids were stolen from her, placed in foster care as a consequence of her imprisonment. She got more time than the state minimum for negligent homicide. Yet despite Alabama's judicial oversight concluding that Judge Hayes broke state laws in his decisions, and despite ruining countless lives by abusing his power, Judge was given 11 months unpaid suspension, and then went right back to being a judge. He later retired entirely on his own terms, a lot like somebody else. And so Kim, just like many, many legal actors, lives her life in a perpetual power trip, able to get away with essentially anything so long as she sauces it up with the image of a beacon of legality. So when Kim's actions finally come home to roost, they do so in the most destructive way possible. One of the most tragic relationships in Better Call Saul is that of Kim Wexler and Howard Hamlin. Howard starts off as Kim's mentor of sorts. His law firm, HHM, puts her through law school, pays her tuition, and grants her a job when she passes the bar. Kim clearly respects him as an authority when she begins her legal career.
Take a ride with me.
Okay,
Where are we going?
But Howard is no angel. He weaponizes hierarchy, throwing his weight around as a higher-up to humiliate and antagonize Kim. He tosses her in doc review, a mundane job in legal discovery, as a punishment for Jimmy messing up at his job. When she leaves HHM, he tries to steal Kim's franchise client, Mesa Verde, away from her, despite her working her ass off to single-handedly get the client in the first place, and despite her only having the one client while HHM had countless. Really petty stuff that only solidifies Kim's resentment of the legal establishment and makes up so much of the big boy firms like HHM, Davis and May, Schweikart and Coakley. Maybe not Schweikart, he's pretty cool. And again, resentment of authority, not inherently a bad thing. Maybe that's just my inner brat talking. But Kim's resentment metastasizes into a desire to hurt Howard deeply, to capture him, Cliff Main, and the rest of HHM in a web of lies, slandering Howard as a coke addict in order to force Cliff's hand to settle the Sandpiper lawsuit. In a way, Howard functions as a stand-in for the rule of law. He runs his own law firm, all his closest friends seem to be lawyers. He dedicates his life to his legal work, and his very presence is stabilizing. He always keeps his cool, he never allows vengeful pettiness to guide his decision-making. Sure, he's patronizing, he has elitist tendencies, just as the law itself does. But you know what, the dude is at least somewhat genuine, which in this world, kind of in short supply. The man genuinely believes in justice and accountability, and he doesn't have to lie to himself about who he is in order to do so. And so Howard's death marks the point when any semblance of stability, security, and justice still within Jim and Kim's world are all thrown out the window at light speed. They watch an innocent man that they toyed with, slandered, and manipulated be put down like a dog, his reputation destroyed, and his brain stripping down their walls. And in the aftermath, we see the most insulting performance in front of the law yet.
Today you're Meryl Streep and Laurence Olivier.
His death is given a fake story, complete with his car being found a few states down, enough to again fool the police and prosecutors. His body is buried with his killer, underneath a lab that years later would produce some of the most addictive and life-destroying meth that the world has ever seen. And though Kim never showed up to the meet with Jackson Mercer, and though Howard tells Cliff about the fake PI that Jim and Kim hired, Cliff remains as oblivious as ever, almost childlike in his inability to put literally anything together. They get away with it yet again.
So, who's Lalo?
Who?
Lalo. Thought some dude named Lalo sent us. You seem pretty freaked out. Never heard of no Lalo on the street.
It's nobody.
Lalo and Howard are polar opposites of each other, one being honest, lawful, hailing from a world of fundraisers and golf and networking over champagne, the other being the spitting definition of violent criminality, hailing from a world of cartels, drug trafficking, and rampant nonsensical violence. And just like Kim, Lalo makes a fool out of the law time and time again throughout the show, all by performing a role in accordance with the wants of the criminal justice system. He gets away with the cold-blooded murder of Fred from Travel Wire simply by looking sad, fooling a judge who assumed he was in total control of Jorge de Guzman, and in the words of Albuquerque District Attorney Suzanne Erickson,
"We had a monster in custody. We just let him walk right out of jail. We failed. The whole system just failed."
what Suzanne gets wrong is that the system didn't just fail to contain the violent criminal, it also failed to contain the criminal lawyer sitting right in front of her. While Kim does quit her career as a lawyer, and Lalo quits his career as a living, breathing human being, the only one who faces any prison time is Jimmy, who gives himself up and confesses to hell and back. Finally, some self-awareness from this dude. Great finale. But this was by no means a just finale, as in his confession, Jimmy exonerates the architect behind Howard's reputational destruction. While Kim admits to being an accessory to the death of Howard to his widow, Cheryl, she only comes forward with the truth after the fall of Walter White. She lets Howard's grieving widow believe that she caused her dead husband's fake drug addiction for 6 years straight, after manipulating her into believing such a disgusting lie in the first place. Cheryl may sue Kim in civil court, she may not, we'll never know. But even if she does, Kim committed a whole litany of crimes before the Howard chicanery was even conceived of. At minimum, she's been an accessory to slander, identity fraud, vehicular theft, evidence tampering, defrauding clients, defrauding her employers, and extortion. It was Kim who pressed forward with the plot to ruin Howard, even when Jimmy was reluctant to move forward, and when the pair had an out, an exit. It was Kim who turned the car around while Jimmy urged her not to. Having remorse and a mediocre life in Florida doesn't make all that go away. But in the end, the same way that Rich could have had the spine to call her out on the Acker scheme, the same way Suzanne Erickson could have literally just called back to church at a later time to find that none of the numbers worked anymore, the law completely and utterly fails in giving Kim her due, and is only able to give Jimmy what he deserves when he hands them a confession on a silver platter, from criminal lawyers to criminal judges. Even when the legal actor's heinous and malicious crimes are acknowledged by the system, some people are simply more legal than others. From the very first season of Better Call Saul, before the stories that would come to define characters like Chuck, Kim, Jimmy, and Lalo even get time to breathe, there's a man named Michael, heading back to his hometown of Philadelphia to kill the 2 cops who murdered his son. Mike's son becomes a cop, and just like his dad before him, is confronted with the choice of dipping into some drug money with the rest of his precinct. Mike tells him to go with it. After all, that's what he did when he was a younger cop. His son listens, but he hesitates, and from there he's a liability, taken out by his fellow cops for fear that he might inform on their criminal operation. While the story of Kim shows us a side of the law too innocent and naive to take out the criminals within its own ranks, the story of Mike, Maddie, and the Philly PD shows us what happens when entire legal institutions themselves become criminal enterprises, while simultaneously smiling for the camera and paying lip service to the law within their public personas, and in particular, the institution of police, and a vehicle by which this corruption actually spreads, a subculture of secrecy. You see, the very nature of police necessitates that cops are taught teamwork and camaraderie.
Expecting more cooperation from you on this, cop to cop.
Individual officers need to know that other individual officers have their back during anything from a domestic abuse call to a shootout. This need to place unwavering faith in fellow cops to protect you from, death, primes officers from the get-go to intensely value loyalty, unity, and looking out for their fellow officer. From this base, a belief in unity and teamwork can go in 2 different directions. It can mean a collection of cops banding together in support after one of them starts suffering from PTSD. It can also mean everybody stays quiet when one cop kills a dealer and distributes the cash he had on him to the others. This is where the value of loyalty gives way to unparalleled corruption. Officers looking the other way when other cops break the law and their oath to public service under the guise of having each other's back, building on and weaponizing the intense trust instilled in them from when they first join a force. This subculture of secrecy under the guise of unity is a massive problem for any effort to stamp out corruption within law enforcement. The subculture has become ingrained and embedded within individual precincts over decades, if not centuries on end, and it's enforced on an incredibly decentralized and local level, with older, experienced cops in any given precinct often being the one to pass on the vicious cycle of abuse and corruption to the younger rookies on the force. Cops are also taught to value hierarchy, paying your dues and respecting those who came before you, which only makes the younger cops even more vulnerable to manipulation from elders. Elders who themselves were almost definitely manipulated into looking the other way when they were rookies by the officers that came before them, just like Maddie, just like Mike, so on and so forth, stretching back generations. Those who believe in the rule of law may argue that such corruption is a problem, no doubt, but that the corruption is isolated from the processes of the broader system. A limited degree of cops in a few precincts here and there, not an indictment of the broader institution of law enforcement. And there are undoubtedly people out there who become cops genuinely wanting to see their precincts and their colleagues do some good. But such cops don't just face a war with a few of their colleagues, they face war with a machine infinitely bigger than they could ever be. In 1997, Chicago Mayor Richard Daley ordered an investigation into the Chicago PD, America's second largest police force, which uncovered a strong, undeniable link between police and the illegal theft of seized drug money, exactly the situation that Maddie found himself in. In 2005, Chicago PD's Special Operations Unit was exposed for enabling and encouraging the abuse of power by countless officers. Discovered within the SOS was a pattern of illegal entry into civilian properties, verbal abuse, humiliation, and threats towards their victims, planting evidence on civilians, and forcing victims to name another victim who would then be targeted. Complete lawlessness from top to bottom. And though the unit was disbanded, its officers were just assimilated into different parts of the force. Only 6 out of hundreds of its cops faced any charges, and even after these revelations of authoritarian power grabs and arbitrary extrajudicial violence came to light, both the Chicago police superintendent and the mayor of Chicago vehemently defended the SOS as an honorable institution, right up until its very end. Beyond Chicago, all you gotta do is jog west, and you'll quickly run into the LA County Sheriff's Department, over 18,000 officers serving 10 million Americans, whose history of violent police gangs has been empirically documented. Actual gangs, such as the Linwood Vikings, the Banditos, the Jump Out Boys, the Executioners, and the Grim Reapers, have run rampant within the department for decades, and according to a 1992 study commissioned by the LA County Board of Supervisors, these police gangs have long focused on terrorizing Black and Hispanic neighborhoods, primarily through the use of senseless and unprovoked violence. But despite the study being written in '92, no legitimate legitimate investigation into what these gangs were, how they operate, or why they went unchecked for so long would begin until 30 years later in 2021. And last, but the opposite of least, there's the NYPD, America's largest police force, employing 35,000 officers and covering 77 precincts. In 1994, a commission was formed by Judge Milton Mullen, who once convinced the New York legislature to expand the police force by 6,000 cops. He formed a commission to investigate widespread and consistent allegations of corruption within the department. And according to Judge Mullen himself, quote, "What we found is that the problem of police corruption extends far beyond a corrupt cop. It has flourished in parts of our city, not only because of opportunity and greed, but because of a police culture that exalts loyalty over integrity, because of the silence of honest officers who fear the consequences of ratting on another cop no matter how grave the crime, because of willfully blind supervisors who fear the consequences of a corruption scandal more than corruption itself, and because for years the New York City Police Department abandoned its responsibility to ensure the integrity of its members." So do tell, Mr. Nisah, how did the NYPD respond to the Mullen Commission? They didn't. The commission finished the report, and the city of New York carried on with business as usual. All of this is to say that the common argument that police deviance is a product of individual bad apples simply isn't based in reality. A better metaphor would be bad orchards. Deep institutional rot encompassing thousands, if not tens of thousands of officers. It's no coincidence that both Better Call Saul and Breaking Bad showcase police corruption as just the norm. No characters ever call out Mike or Hank for taking bribes or violating constitutional rights, as within their roles, violating laws is just how things are, and refusing to partake in the violation puts many cops in an impossible situation. Sure, coming forward is the brave thing to do, the right thing to do, but it also means going up against armies of officers, with power brokers and law and politics ready to take their side. And Mike knows this all too well. Instead of going to the police, as people often do when they suspect two men of murder, Mike avenges his son's death, killing the two men who took out his son, Hoffman and Fensky. Not because extra-legal violence is the answer, but because going to the cops would put Mike at war with a machine infinitely stronger than him. When Mike sees his son's killers, he doesn't see two common crooks. He sees two well-respected and experienced officers of the law. He knows that the criminal justice system simply isn't designed to put men like them away. And so he gets his justice by rejecting the law's methods of justice entirely. This entire arc with Mike, Maddie, and the Philly PD takes place over a single episode, 5-0, one of the greatest episodes of television I've ever seen. But the reason I decided to focus in on this one episode story is because the suffering that police corruption brought to Mike's life is the catalyst to everything else he becomes. From working the Price, to working for Gus, to Warner Ziegler, to his efforts to save Nacho, to meeting Walt and Jesse. If Hoffman, Fensky, and the rest of his Philadelphia precinct weren't dirty, Maddie would still be alive, and Mike wouldn't feel the need to make things right, to make boatloads of money as a criminal mercenary in order to provide for Maddie's widow and his granddaughter. Not only does the law's corruption decimate Mike's understanding of himself, filling him with unbridled guilt while simultaneously hollowing out his sense of morals, with time it puts him on a path that seals his fate.
Hey, think on it.
We always end up having the same conversation, don't we?
Out of all the characters in Better Call Saul, the undisputed heavyweight champion of the world of law as an illusion is without a shadow of a doubt Jimmy McGill, or as he later goes by, Saul Badwoman. Ever since he was a kid, first internalizing the message that those who cheat and deceive are the ones who win, Jimmy lives most of his life as a serial deceiver, putting on the most convincing and elaborate performances, with the goal of manipulating those around him to do his bidding. And of course, as he embarks on his legal career, Jimmy struggles between his deceptive side and a more genuine side of himself. But given where he ends up, scamming the federal government by paying a man to pretend to be a drug trafficker and go to prison so that his own client can get off scot-free, it's fairly evident which path he goes down. As Jimmy descends into the mask of Saul Goodman, becoming more and more willing and capable of using the legal order as a puppet for his criminal schemes to sneak behind unnoticed, I'd argue that the foremost reason why Jimmy goes down this path is his brother Chuck. If Howard represents what the law could be, Chuck represents what the law is. Chuck dedicates his existence to the law, defending and fighting for its legitimacy and prestige at every turn. He built HHM from the ground up with Howard's father. He tutored Howard for the bar, and in the words of my boy Rich Schweikart,
I figured you'd be arguing in front of the Supreme Court someday.
He's the only one besides Kim who constantly sees Jimmy's scams and schemes for what they truly are, and he does everything he can to expose Jimmy's criminal schemes to the public eye, to have him held accountable by a court. To Chuck, the law isn't just a system of rules, it's the sole reason why a society can maintain order, protect the individual, and most of all, ensure justice at all costs.
Let justice be done, though the heavens fall.
But if Chuck truly does define the rule of law as no matter who you are, your actions having consequences, he follows in the footsteps of many lawyers before him, and fails miserably in meeting this standard himself. Chuck spits in the face of accountability and justice whenever it doesn't benefit him, when he can hurt those he resents. He didn't care at all about justice and people getting their due when his brother gave up his entire life in Illinois, got an honest job in the HHM mailroom, passed the LSAT, enrolled himself into law school, got through law school, got his law degree, and then passed the bar all entirely on his own, and all while working a full-time goddamn job, only to be denied anything more than a pat on the back and a condescending nickname. Jimmy wasn't entitled to a job at HHM, but Chuck lied to his face, telling him he'd vouch for him, and then sneaking behind his back to keep Jimmy down, while using Howard as the fall guy. Chuck didn't care about justice when Jimmy once again proved him wrong, putting together that sandpiper case, diving into dumpsters and writing on toilet paper to build a massive class-action lawsuit from nothing, showing a level of skill, wit, and dedication that most lawyers could only dream of. But Chuck again strong-arms Howard into playing bad cop, having the nerve to look shocked and appalled as Howard does his bidding. Chuck didn't care about fairness when he showed up to the hearings on the sandpiper case with the sole purpose of tripping up his brother, hoping to see him fail.
Why are you here?
To bear witness.
Both Jimmy and Chuck are kinda dicks, but the true differentiating factor between the brothers is that Chuck keeps his schemes in accordance with written statutes and the text of the New Mexico Criminal Code. But if the state of New Mexico decided that convicted criminals could pay someone else to serve their time for them, that wouldn't make doing so just. Beyond conflating legality with justice, Chuck represents a malfunctioning legal status quo through his elitism. He sees the law and legal representation as the forte of the fortunate.
University of American Samoa, for Christ's sake? An online course? What a joke.
To Chuck, a cheaper, less prestigious law school is the mark of a fake lawyer. Never mind that law school is only one out of countless steps in becoming a successful lawyer, or that a lawyer's ability to represent their client's interests is by no means defined by the few years they spent in an institution before their career even began. But when Howard tells Chuck that Jimmy was offered a job at the prestigious Davis in Maine, his only question is,
they're aware of his background at Davis in Maine? His education.
The barriers to entry within the legal world are notoriously sky high. The image and reputation of a lawyer can often be highly dependent on the prestige of the law school that they went to, while at the same time the most prestigious law schools are locked behind massive paywalls, where students with familial connections in law or politics are often let in because their mom or dad was the right person. These two premises create a fundamental contradiction in the argument that the law is impartial and non-biased. After all, if the enforcers of the law disproportionately come from wealthy, well-connected backgrounds, it stands to reason that then the interests of the wealthy and well-connected will be disproportionately maintained, which is exactly what we see in the real world. Chuck doesn't live long enough to see the flaws in his way of thinking, and which is unfortunate. Imagine Chuck meeting Walt, and Jimmy is still a grown man, capable of making his own decisions. Nobody forced him to pull that billboard scam. But if Chuck had simply treated Jimmy as an equal, if he had respected his hard work and the opinions of the New Mexico Bar Association, he wouldn't have internalized the identity of slipping Jimmy to nearly the same extent. Every time his brother tries in earnest to move past who he once was, to build a genuine and lawful legal practice for himself, Chuck swats him down, advocating for the legal status quo, a law that is stiff, highbrow, impersonal, and aristocratic, a law that can feed his sense of self-importance by limiting who can practice it and who can benefit from it, which makes it all the more telling that in the end, the rule of law's most passionate advocate created Saul Goodman. His last conversation with Jimmy is hauntingly cruel, commanding him to give up trying to be anything more than a scammer, a conman, and a fraud. Now, did Chuck mean these words? Of course not. He was just angry and wanted to take it out on the person who hurt him. So he performs, and his performance ends up being more destructive than he could ever know. Jimmy is never the same after this conversation, and with those words repeating over and over in his head, he takes Chuck's advice as a final middle finger to his brother, diving headfirst into legal nihilism and becoming the vessel by which Walter White would ruin countless lives and build his international methamphetamine empire. Alright, enough pessimism. The most prevalent theme within Saul Gone is that of holding yourself accountable in a lawless world. The law is ready to give the one member of Heisenberg's criminal operation that they actually managed to catch 7 years in prison. A slap in the face to the victims of Walter White. But they don't. Saul Goodman doesn't let it happen. he gets 86 years in prison, not because he's caught dead to rights by the prosecution, but because he personally makes the call to face the music and for the first time in God knows how long to tell the truth. In a flashback to Mike and Jimmy out in the desert, we see Mike voice his biggest regret in life. The one decision that he feels led him down his criminal career.
Day I took my first bribe.
And we get one final scene of Chuck, where he shows a side of himself that wants to be more than what he's become. He treats Jimmy like he's an actual lawyer, while trying to connect with his brother, superiority complex and all.
I'm hoping you didn't steal that from a motel ice machine.
You can hope.
Saul Goodman doesn't try and put forth a grand solution on how to solve corruption or incompetence, how to build a sweepingly superior legal system to what we got right now, because while that is an important objective, Jimmy and Kim were never going to go on a 50-state tour to campaign for legal reform. What it does show is that if an individual wants to be more than a broken, hollowed shell, law as an illusion isn't going to get them there. That individuals aren't powerless against a broken system or doomed to just be who they are. And so Jimmy's decision to finally allow justice to be served, even when he didn't have to, allows him to cleanse his soul and find genuine lasting peace with who he is. Something that all the laundered drug money in the world couldn't get him. Because an illusion is just that. It's not real, and no matter how much one tries to hide what they truly are with distractions or schemes or elaborate performances, it's only a matter of time before the mirage unravels.